The war had been going on for so long that Daniel had almost forgotten what peace felt like. Every morning he woke up to the sound of explosions in the distance, to the smell of smoke in the air, and to the heavy feeling of fear in his chest. He was only 24, but the lines on his face made him look older. He had seen too much, lost too many friends, and yet he kept moving forward because he believed he had no choice. He was a soldier, and soldiers kept fighting until the orders told them to stop. On that day, the sky was gray, filled with thick clouds of dust that made the air hard to breathe. The ruins of buildings surrounded him as he tried to catch up with his unit. They had been ambushed, and in the chaos, Daniel had been separated. He moved carefully through the broken streets, his weapon ready, his eyes scanning every corner. The silence was heavy, broken only by distant gunfire. He knew the enemy could be hiding anywhere. As he turned a corner, he heard something unusual. It wasn't the sound of weapons or footsteps. It was softer, almost like a whimper. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Soldiers often heard things when their nerves were stretched too thin. But then it came again, a small, shaky sound like someone trying to hold back tears. Daniel paused, his heart beating faster. He followed the sound, stepping carefully over fallen bricks and broken glass. In the corner of a collapsed building, half covered by rubble, he saw movement. His instincts told him to be ready for danger. But when his eyes adjusted, he froze, in shock. It wasn't a soldier, it wasn't a fighter. It was a child. The child was small, no older than 6 or 7 in human years, but Daniel knew immediately that this was no human child. The skin had a faint shimmer like moonlight on water, and the eyes were larger than human eyes, glowing softly even in the dim light. The hair, or what looked like hair, flowed in thin strands that almost seemed alive, shifting slightly as if stirred by an invisible breeze. This was an alien child, one of the very people Daniel's side had been fighting against for years. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. His training told him the enemy was dangerous, even their young. He had been told they were cunning, that mercy could get him killed. But as he looked closer, he saw no weapon, no threat. The child's small hands were pressed against the rubble as though trying to push it away, but the stones were too heavy. The little one's body shook with fear, and when its glowing eyes lifted to meet Daniel's, he didn't see an enemy. He saw fear, helplessness, and the kind of innocence no war should ever touch. The ground shook suddenly as a distant blast rattled the ruins. Part of the wall above the child shifted dangerously. Without thinking, Daniel rushed forward, dropping his weapon and throwing himself over the child just as a chunk of concrete fell. The debris landed against his back, heavy but not crushing, and the child let out a startled cry. Daniel groaned from the impact, but he stayed there, shielding the little one with his own body until the shaking stopped. When it was over, Daniel slowly pushed the rubble aside and lifted himself up. The child stared at him with wide eyes, trembling. He expected it to scream, to run, or maybe even to attack in fear. But instead, the child just clutched his arm tightly, as if instinctively sensing he was there to help. The grip was small and weak, yet it carried a weight Daniel couldn't ignore. "Hey, you're all right," he whispered softly, his voice shaky. He didn't even know if the child could understand his words, but he hoped his tone carried enough comfort. He carefully removed the smaller pieces of rubble around the child, freeing its legs. The child winced but didn't cry out, only watching him with those glowing eyes that seemed far too wise for someone so young. Daniel sat back for a moment, unsure what to do next. He knew his people would see this as betrayal. If his commander saw him helping the enemy's young, there would be questions, maybe even punishment. But looking at the child, Daniel realized he couldn't walk away. This wasn't a soldier. This was just a little one caught in a war it didn't understand. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small water bottle. Slowly, he offered it to the child, holding it in front of him. The alien hesitated, its eyes flicking between Daniel and the bottle. Then, with careful movements, it reached out and took it. Its hands were delicate, with long, slender fingers, and they shook as it lifted the bottle to its lips. The child drank greedily, water spilling down its chin before lowering it again with a quiet sigh. Daniel almost smiled, though the situation was anything but light. "There you go," he murmured. "Better?" The child blinked, tilting its head, and then made a small sound, something between a hum and a word. Daniel didn't understand the language, but the tone was soft, almost grateful. He nodded, pretending he did. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by distant echoes of battle. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't stay here forever, but he also couldn't leave the child. He tried to think of options. Maybe he could bring the child back to his side's camp. But no, that would be worse. They would see the alien as a prisoner or worse, a threat. The thought of this small being locked away or hurt made his chest tighten. He couldn't let that happen. The child shifted closer, its small frame pressing against him. Daniel felt the warmth of its body and the tremble of its fear. Slowly, almost without realizing, he wrapped an arm around it. He had lost his younger sister years ago in an attack at home, and for a fleeting moment holding this child brought back the memory of protecting her during storms when they were little. The ache in his heart deepened, but so did his resolve. More rubble shifted in the distance, and Daniel tensed. He picked up his weapon quickly, scanning the area. The child clung to his arm, not letting go. Daniel whispered, "It's okay. I've got you." The words were automatic, like a promise he didn't fully understand yet, but he meant them. As he crouched there, Daniel thought about how strange life was. He had been raised to see these people as enemies, to believe they were monsters who wanted to destroy everything human. But now, sitting here with this fragile little one beside him, he couldn't see a monster. He saw only a child who had been unlucky enough to be born into a war started by others. The sky outside darkened as evening approached, and the sounds of battle grew distant. Daniel knew he had to move before nightfall. He carefully lifted the child into his arms. The alien's body was light, but the responsibility Daniel felt was heavier than any weight he had carried before. The child rested its head against his chest, its glowing eyes slowly closing in exhaustion. It trusted him, even though it had every reason not to. That trust pierced through Daniel more deeply than any wound ever could. He whispered again, more to himself than to the child, "I'll keep you safe." The promise settled in his heart, unshakable and real. In that ruined city, with the world falling apart around them, a soldier who thought he had lost all purpose found something new, a reason to fight that had nothing to do with orders or commanders. It was simple. It was human. It was the will to protect a child, even if that child came from the other side. Daniel moved quickly but carefully through the ruined streets, carrying the small alien child in his arms. Each step felt heavy, not because of the child's weight, but because of the burden he had chosen to carry. He knew this decision could cost him everything, his career, his freedom, maybe even his life. But as the little one clung tightly to his uniform, Daniel felt something inside him he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. He had spent years fighting and killing, but for the first time in forever, he was protecting life instead of taking it. He ducked into an abandoned building to rest. The walls were cracked, the ceiling half gone, but it gave them a little shelter. He set the child down gently on a broken bench and knelt in front of it. The child's large, glowing eyes followed his every move. There was still fear in them, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe even trust. Daniel pulled a ration pack from his bag and opened it. The smell was bland but safe. He broke a piece of bread in half and offered it. The child hesitated, sniffed it, then took a small bite. Its face scrunched up at the unfamiliar taste, but after a moment it chewed slowly, as if realizing that food was food no matter which side it came from. Daniel chuckled softly. "Not the best, huh? Trust me, I've been eating this stuff for months and I don't like it either." The child tilted its head, almost as if it was trying to understand his words. Then it made a soft sound, something like a hum. Daniel couldn't understand, but the tone felt gentle. Maybe it was trying to speak its language, maybe even thank him. That thought made his chest tighten with emotion he hadn't expected. He reached into his pack again, this time pulling out a small picture he kept hidden. It was old and worn, a photo of his sister when she was little. Her smile was bright, her hair messy, her arms wrapped around their dog. He had carried it everywhere as a reminder of what he was fighting for. Now he showed it to the child. "This is my sister," he said quietly. "She's gone now, but she was like you, small, full of life." The child leaned forward, staring at the photo with wide eyes. Then it looked back at him and touched his arm gently with its long, slender fingers. Daniel felt a strange connection in that moment, as if the child was telling him it understood. He closed his eyes briefly, fighting the sting of tears. He hadn't cried in years, but this small being had broken through walls he didn't even realize he had built. The sound of footsteps outside snapped him back to reality. Daniel's hand went to his weapon instantly. He motioned for the child to stay quiet, pressing a finger to his lips. The child mimicked the motion clumsily, and Daniel almost smiled despite the danger. 2 soldiers passed by the building. From their uniforms, Daniel recognized them as his own people. He froze, his heart pounding. If they came inside and saw the child, there would be no way to explain. He would be accused of treason, of helping the enemy. He held his breath as the voices grew louder. "Can't believe Command still wants us here," one soldier muttered. "Nothing but ruins. The aliens cleared out days ago." "Yeah, but you know how it is. Orders are orders." Their footsteps crunched closer. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger, ready to protect the child if he had to. But after a long moment, the soldiers moved past the building and their voices faded into the distance. Daniel let out a slow breath of relief, his muscles finally relaxing. He looked at the child, who was staring up at him with trust instead of fear. "That was close," he whispered. "You can't make a sound when they're near, understand?" The child didn't know the words, but somehow Daniel felt it understood the meaning. It gave a small nod, imitating him, and Daniel couldn't help but smile. As the night fell, Daniel knew he couldn't return to his camp. If he did, the child's life would be in danger. But he also couldn't stay here forever. Supplies were low, and the area wasn't safe. He needed a plan. He thought of the alien territory not far from here. It was risky, but maybe he could find a way to return the child to its people. That would be the right thing to do. He wasn't sure what they would think of him, a human soldier, carrying one of their young. They might attack him on sight, but he couldn't abandon the child. As the hours passed, Daniel tried to keep the child calm. He gave it water, shared more of his rations, and even hummed a tune his mother used to sing to him when he was little. To his surprise, the child hummed back, its voice soft and melodic, almost like music. The sound was soothing, and for a while Daniel forgot the war outside. It was just him and the child, 2 beings from different worlds sharing a fragile peace. But peace never lasted long in war. The next morning, Daniel carefully made his way toward the outskirts of the city. He carried the child close, keeping to the shadows. His heart pounded every time he heard voices or gunfire in the distance. Twice he had to hide as patrols passed by. Each time the child remained silent, holding on to him tightly, as if sensing the danger. At one point, Daniel spotted a group of civilians, humans who had survived the destruction. For a moment, he considered asking for help. But then he realized what would happen. They would see the child as an enemy. Fear and anger would take over, and the little one would not survive. He clenched his jaw and moved on. By midday, the sun was high, and the heat was unbearable. Daniel stopped under the shade of a half-broken wall. He gave the child more water and tried to rest for a moment. His body ached, but his mind was restless. He thought of what his commander would say if he knew. He thought of the punishment, the shame. But none of that mattered when he looked at the child. He couldn't explain why, but saving this young life felt more important than anything else he had ever done. The child reached out suddenly and touched his chest, right over his heart. Its glowing eyes met his, and Daniel felt a strange calm wash over him. It was almost as if the child was saying, "I trust you. Don't give up." He smiled faintly and whispered, "Don't worry, I won't." That evening, Daniel finally caught sight of something that made his stomach twist. In the distance, he saw alien soldiers. They were moving cautiously, weapons ready, scanning the ruins. They were searching for something, or someone. Daniel's grip tightened around the child. Could these be its people? Would they take it back safely, or would they see him as a threat and kill him before he could explain? The child stirred in his arms, its eyes lighting up brighter at the sight. Daniel realized then that these soldiers were indeed its people. The child recognized them. Relief and fear hit him at the same time. He was doing the right thing, but it could cost him his life. He crouched low, staying hidden behind the rubble. He whispered to the child, "That's your family, isn't it? You want to go to them?" The child looked at him, then at the soldiers, and made a soft sound. Daniel swallowed hard. He had brought the child this far, but now he had to make a choice. Reveal himself and risk everything, or walk away and leave the child to find its way alone. Walking away wasn't an option. He tightened his grip on the child, took a deep breath, and stepped out from behind the rubble. The alien soldiers immediately raised their weapons, shouting in their language. Daniel froze, lifting one hand slowly in a sign of peace, while keeping the child close with the other. The child squirmed, reaching toward them, but still clung tightly to him. The soldiers hesitated, their eyes flicking between Daniel and the child. Confusion spread across their faces. This was not what they had expected to see, a human soldier protecting one of their young. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest, but he stood firm. Finally, one of the soldiers lowered his weapon slightly. He said something in their language, his tone softer. The child responded with a small cry, stretching its arms toward him. Daniel bent down slowly, gently placing the child on the ground. The little one ran to the soldier, who scooped it up in relief. Daniel watched, his chest heavy. He had done what he set out to do. The child was safe. But even as he turned to leave, he felt eyes burning into him, the eyes of the alien soldier holding the child. Gratitude mixed with suspicion. They didn't shoot him, not yet. But Daniel knew this act of compassion had been seen, and word would spread, and that was the risk. His own people might see him as a traitor. The aliens might see him as a strange puzzle. But for Daniel, none of that mattered in that moment. He had saved a child, and deep inside, he knew his life would never be the same again. The night after Daniel gave the child back to its people, he could not sleep. He lay hidden in the shadows of a ruined building, his weapon close at hand, his eyes staring at the broken ceiling above him. His mind replayed the moment again and again. The way the child's glowing eyes had looked at him with trust, the way it had clung to his chest as though he was its only protection, and the way it had finally run into the arms of its people. He should have felt relief. He had done the right thing. The child was safe, but instead, there was a hollow ache inside him, a strange emptiness that he could not shake. For years, Daniel had followed orders without question. He had seen enemies as enemies, nothing more. But now, the simple act of protecting one small life had shaken everything he thought he knew. He had seen innocence in the face of an alien child. He had felt trust that crossed the line of war. And now, as much as he wanted to forget, he could not. He decided to move out before dawn. Staying too close to alien territory was dangerous. His own people were searching the ruins, and if they found him alone, questions would be asked. But, as he prepared to leave, something strange happened. The ground trembled slightly as though a group of people were approaching. Daniel tensed, gripping his weapon tightly. Through the broken window, he saw figures moving carefully through the ruins. At first, he thought they were more soldiers, but these figures moved differently. They carried themselves with more authority, more purpose, and at the center of the group was someone who immediately drew his eyes. She was taller than the rest, her presence commanding even in the half-light of dawn. Her skin carried the same shimmering glow as the child's, but her features were sharper, stronger, filled with a kind of strength that came from both battle and leadership. Her eyes glowed brighter than the others, not just with light, but with emotion. She was scanning the area with desperation, searching for something, or someone. Daniel's heart skipped a beat as he realized who she must be, the child's mother. He stayed hidden, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to step forward and show himself. Another part of him knew it was dangerous. If the child's mother saw him, she might attack him instantly, thinking he had harmed her young. He had no way to explain that he had saved the child. Still, his feet refused to move away. Something in him needed to see what would happen. One of the alien soldiers moved ahead, scanning the rubble, and called out in their language. The tall woman's head snapped toward him, and then Daniel saw her face soften. Out of the shadows, the small child came running. It had stayed close to the group since Daniel gave it back, and now it leapt into her arms with a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The woman dropped her weapon immediately and caught the child, holding it close as though she would never let go again. She pressed her forehead against the child's glowing one, whispering words in a voice filled with relief. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He didn't need to understand the language to know what she was saying. She had thought she lost her child, and now it was back in her arms. The soldiers around her lowered their weapons respectfully, watching their leader reunite with her young. For a moment, even in the middle of war, there was no hatred, only love. But then the child turned, lifting its small hand and pointing, straight at Daniel's hiding place. Daniel froze. The mother followed the gesture, her glowing eyes locking onto the shadows where he stood. For a second, everything seemed to stop. Then her expression changed. She didn't raise her weapon. She didn't order her soldiers to attack. Instead, she narrowed her eyes with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. The child squirmed in her arms, reaching toward Daniel, babbling in its language. It was calling to him, trying to show her who he was. The mother's gaze hardened. She said something sharp to her soldiers, and instantly they surrounded Daniel's hiding spot. He knew he had no choice now. If he didn't come out, they would drag him out or kill him. Slowly he stepped into the open, keeping his hands visible, his weapon slung behind him. The alien soldiers raised their weapons at once, but the tall woman lifted her hand and they froze. Her eyes stayed locked on Daniel, studying him, weighing every detail. Daniel's heart pounded. He forced himself to stay calm, though every instinct screamed at him to run. He raised his hand slightly in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to fight," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. His tone was all he had, and he tried to make it as calm and honest as possible. The child wriggled again, reaching for him. The mother's eyes flicked, down, then back at him. Slowly, carefully, she stepped forward. She said something in her language, her voice low but intense. Daniel shook his head, helpless. "I don't understand," he admitted softly. For a long moment there was silence. Then, to his surprise, she lowered her weapon completely. She handed the child to one of the soldiers, who took it gently, and then she walked toward Daniel until she was only a few feet away. Her eyes never left his. Daniel could see now that they were not just glowing, they were filled with questions. She wanted to know who he was. She wanted to know what he had done. He swallowed hard. With slow movements, he touched his chest with one hand, then pointed at the child, then placed his hand over his heart again. He hoped the gesture would make sense. That he was saying, "I protected your child." The mother's eyes widened slightly. She looked back at the child, who was now reaching out toward Daniel again, then back at him. Something softened in her expression. She said something to her soldiers, and though Daniel couldn't understand the words, he could hear the command in her voice. They lowered their weapons reluctantly, still watching him with suspicion. The mother stepped closer, her gaze still locked on his. Then, to his surprise, she reached out and touched his arm. The gesture was firm, testing. It was as if she wanted to feel if he was real, if this human soldier truly existed and had done what her child's reaction suggested. Her touch lingered only for a second, but in that moment, Daniel felt something shift. This was no ordinary enemy. She was a mother, and he had saved what mattered most to her. The child wriggled again, finally breaking free from the soldier holding it, and ran back to Daniel. It grabbed his hand, glowing eyes bright with happiness. Daniel looked down in surprise, then up again at the mother. She was watching, her face unreadable, but her eyes held something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude. Curiosity, maybe even respect. She spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Daniel didn't know the words, but he thought he understood the meaning. She was asking why. Why would a human soldier, sworn enemy, risk everything to save her young? Daniel could not answer with words, so he answered the only way he knew. He bent down, lifted the child into his arms and held it gently, then looked back at her. He touched the child's shoulder with care, then placed his hand back over his heart. His eyes said the rest. Because it was the right thing to do. The mother's expression finally softened just a little. She gave a slow nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to show she understood. In that ruined city, surrounded by soldiers and enemies, something remarkable happened. For the first time since the war began, there was no hatred in her eyes when she looked at him. There was only a fragile, silent understanding between two parents of life, one by blood, one by choice. Daniel realized then that his choice had not just saved a child. It had opened a door, a small one perhaps, but a door nonetheless. And as the alien mother stood before him, her glowing eyes fixed on him with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, Daniel felt a weight settle in his chest. This moment would not end here. It was the beginning of something far greater than he could imagine. After that first tense meeting, Daniel found himself unable to leave the alien territory. He knew he should return to his own side, explain what had happened, and resume his duties as a soldier, but he could not. Not when the child he had saved was here, and not when he had seen the mother's eyes. Those eyes filled with gratitude, curiosity, and something he could not yet name. He moved cautiously, always keeping to the shadows, careful not to draw attention from other alien soldiers. At first, the mother watched him from a distance, always alert, always protective of her child. But she did not order him away. Instead, she observed him silently, testing him. Daniel understood immediately that every action, every movement mattered. This was more than suspicion. It was judgment. He had to prove that he meant no harm. Days passed slowly. Daniel would follow from a distance, keeping an eye on the child, ensuring its safety. Sometimes the mother would approach him cautiously, speaking in her language which he could not understand. He learned to respond with gestures, hand signs, and expressions. Over time, they developed a rudimentary way of communicating. A nod could mean agreement, a hand over the heart meant trust, and a gentle bow indicated respect. Words were not needed. Their actions spoke for them. At first, the child remained hesitant, sometimes hiding behind its mother, peeking at Daniel with curiosity and a hint of fear. But gradually, the child began to recognize him not as a threat but as a protector. It would run to him when the mother was not watching, laugh when he made soft noises, and mimic the gestures he had taught. Daniel found himself smiling more than he had in months, feeling a warmth he had long forgotten. One afternoon, while the mother was out hunting for food, Daniel sat with the child near a small stream. The sun reflected off its shimmering skin, making it glow softly. Daniel watched as the child dipped its fingers into the water, splashing gently. "See? Water is safe," he said quietly, though he knew the words were meaningless to the child. But tone mattered. He tried to convey calmness, safety, and care. The child laughed, a sound like delicate chimes, and that small sound made Daniel's chest ache with emotion. It was in these quiet moments that Daniel began to understand the mother too. He saw her strength not just in combat or command, but in her gentleness with her child. She was fearless yet tender, protective yet willing to trust. He began to admire her in ways he had never expected. The idea that an enemy could hold such depth and honor was something he could barely comprehend. Yet each day spent in her presence taught him more about empathy, courage, and connection than years of war had ever shown. Their bond developed, slowly. When danger approached, wild predators or enemy patrols, Daniel would act instinctively to protect the child. Sometimes the mother would intervene, sometimes she would step back, watching him carefully. She tested him repeatedly, pushing him into situations where he had to act without hesitation. And each time, Daniel rose to the challenge. He learned to anticipate threats, to move silently, and to protect not just the child, but the fragile trust they were building. Evenings were the most peaceful. Daniel would sit near the fire he had made. The child curled against him while the mother observed quietly from a distance. Sometimes she would approach, sharing simple foods with him, offering small gestures of friendship. Daniel never spoke her language, yet he understood more from her eyes than any words could convey. Gratitude, relief, curiosity, and slowly, a sense of respect that felt more personal than formal. One evening, the mother spoke more than usual. Her gestures were deliberate, pointing at Daniel, then at the child, then back at herself. She was asking something, and Daniel realized she wanted to understand why he had risked his life for her child. He shook his head, touched his chest, and pointed to the child, then back to himself. It was a simple explanation. "I protected your young because it was right." The mother studied him silently for a long time, her glowing eyes searching for deceit. Daniel met her gaze without flinching, trusting that his honesty would be clear. Slowly, she lowered her hand, the tension in her shoulders releasing slightly. A small nod acknowledged his truth. It was a quiet moment, but it meant more than any battle victory. Trust had been forged where suspicion had ruled. As days turned into weeks, their relationship deepened. The mother began to share small glimpses of her world with him, teaching him signs, sharing lessons on survival, and even allowing him to help in minor tasks that were important to her people. Daniel felt accepted in ways he had never experienced among his own comrades. The child became the bridge between them, a living reminder that their worlds could connect in ways beyond hatred and fear. They faced challenges together, of course. Food was scarce, dangers lurked around every corner, and other alien soldiers often questioned Daniel's presence. Yet through it all, the mother never removed her protection entirely. She began to see that Daniel's compassion was genuine, that he was not merely following orders but acting from his own moral compass. That realization shifted something deep within her. One evening as the sun set, painting the sky in colors neither human nor alien had names for, the mother approached Daniel alone. She handed him a small object, a token from her world, something delicate and significant. Daniel did not understand its full meaning, but he knew it was a sign of trust, of acknowledgement, of a bond beyond words. He held it carefully, feeling its weight, not just in his hand but in his heart. The child laughed nearby, playing in the stream, unaware of the significance of the gesture. Daniel watched the small figure, the symbol of hope that had brought them all together. And as he looked up at the mother, he realized that what had started as an act of mercy had grown into something more profound, a bond that transcended war, race, and prejudice. They were still enemies in the eyes of the world. Their nations were still at war, and their people would never understand. But in the quiet moments of survival, Daniel found himself connected to them in ways that were unbreakable. The mother's respect, the child's trust, and the shared understanding that life was precious, all of it had created a fragile, unspoken alliance. It was not just protection anymore. It was friendship. It was trust. And slowly it began to feel like something even stronger, something Daniel dared not name yet. But that was unmistakable in the way he felt when she looked at him, when the child reached for him, when they moved together in the shadows of a broken world. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And through it all, the bond between them grew, solidifying in ways that words could not capture. They communicated with gestures, shared meals, and protected each other in silence. Daniel had never imagined that a single act of compassion could lead to this, yet now he could not imagine life without it. In the quiet of a starry night, sitting by the small fire, with the child sleeping in his lap and the mother nearby, Daniel realized that the world he had known, black and white, enemies and allies, had shifted. There were new colors now, new possibilities, a chance for understanding, for peace, for connection beyond what any war could dictate. And as he watched the mother tend to the child, her movements precise and caring, Daniel felt an unfamiliar warmth. It was not just the satisfaction of having saved a life. It was something deeper, a recognition that compassion, courage, and trust could cross even the greatest divides, creating a bond that was stronger than fear, stronger than war, stronger than hatred. For the first time in years, Daniel felt hope. The months passed, and the bond between Daniel, the child, and its mother continued to grow. Though the war raged on beyond the borders of their small refuge, within the ruined city, a different story was unfolding. A story of trust, compassion, and connection that defied everything their worlds had taught them. Daniel had become a constant presence in their lives. He helped the mother hunt, repair shelter, and care for the child. His skill in combat and survival was unmatched, but it was his compassion that earned her respect. She had watched him act without hesitation, without seeking reward, without thought for his own safety. Every time danger arose, he had risked himself for her child. Every time she observed him, she saw honesty, integrity, and courage unlike any she had known among her own people or enemies. The child, now more confident and playful, ran to him without fear, climbing into his arms whenever it felt like it. Daniel responded with laughter, with gentle words, with care. The child was his bridge to them, the living reminder of what he had done and why. One day, as they gathered water from a hidden spring, the mother stopped and looked directly at Daniel. Her glowing eyes were steady, unflinching. She did not speak, but her presence commanded attention. The air seemed to thrum with meaning, heavy with unspoken words. Daniel understood immediately that something important was about to happen. She gestured for him to sit, and then for the child to sit between them. Slowly, she placed her hands on Daniel's shoulders, holding him steady, looking deeply into his eyes. Daniel felt a shiver run through him. He had seen gratitude, curiosity, and respect before, but this was something different, something personal. She spoke in her language, her tone deliberate, careful. Daniel could not understand the words, but her meaning was unmistakable. She was claiming him, not as a prisoner, not as a soldier, but as someone who had become integral to her life. She was acknowledging that he had saved her child, that he had risked himself without hesitation, and that in doing so, he had formed a connection that could not be ignored. The child laughed, sensing the gravity of the moment, and reached for Daniel. He hugged it, then looked at the mother. He understood without words what she was saying. He had become more than a friend or protector. He had become family. This declaration shocked Daniel. He had never considered such a thing. He had been a soldier, trained to follow orders, not to forge bonds across enemy lines. But as he looked at the mother, saw the trust in her eyes, felt the weight of responsibility and love he had developed for both her and the child, he realized that he could not deny it. He had already claimed a place in their lives. For the first time, he felt a profound sense of belonging. Not with his own people, not in the war he had been trained to fight, but here, in this fragile peace with the child he had saved, and the mother who now saw him as essential. He reached out, taking her hands in his. They did not need words. Their hearts spoke in a language older than conflict, older than war, older than fear. It was the language of trust, of courage, of shared survival. The child climbed onto his lap, glowing eyes bright and full of life, looking between them. Daniel laughed softly. He had never imagined that saving a child would lead to this, an unbreakable bond with the mother, a connection that defied the war, a promise of a future neither side could predict. From that day forward, Daniel was no longer just a soldier. He was a protector, a companion, a bridge between two worlds, and in claiming him, the mother had also claimed a new possibility for peace, for understanding, for a life where compassion mattered more than conflict. Together, they began to imagine a world beyond the war, a world where humans and aliens could coexist, guided by trust and care, and forever connected by the child who had brought them together. Daniel's life, once defined by orders and battles, had transformed completely. He was no longer a stranger to them. He was family, and their claim on each other was eternal. And in that fragile, luminous bond they found hope, the hope that even in the darkest times, love, courage, and compassion could create a future stronger than any war.